All right, good evening, everybody. Our friend Sam asks, why are there so many haredim involved in politics in Israel when they don't want it to exist? The answer to this is that that's not actually the case. There are different camps of haredim, and so the Ada Haredis, which would be Satmar and then the Terry Karta and Toldasaran and the and dort the Visa Heistes the the other people, what are they called? The Toldasaran, Toldasavar Mitzchak, Brisk, these communities and some other communities aligned with them politically don't want the state of Israel to exist. And that is the minority of the haredim in Israel. The majority of the haredim in Israel would be associated with Agudas Yisrael and some of the other Shas and some of the other movements. These would be most of the Lithuanian communities that are, dressed like the more modern dress with the short coats and the bent down hats, or the rabbis wear Prince Albert frocks and and Hamburgs, as opposed to wearing a shtreimel, which some of the old Lithuanian and the Torah Karta, some of the other communities they have. And a lot of the Hasidic communities that are other than the Hungarian communities, meaning most of the Polish communities, the Gerach Hasidim, the Galicianer, like the Belzer, the Romanian, like Viznitz and the Rizhiner, and among those communities, you have even different views as far as that's concerned. Meaning you'll have some, particularly from the Rizhiner Einiklach, although you have some that are more right-wing. Bahush, I think, is considered to be, even the Rizhiner Einikl, and they're considered to be more aligned with Eida Haredis ideologically. But most of the Rizhiner Einiklach traditionally were more pro-Zionist, to the point where there's a Rebbe who is an Einikl from the old Viznitzer Rebbe. He's a professor and he's a brigadier general. Hoshea Friedman is called Pakshana Rebbe, and he is a religious Zionist, and he even pronounces, even when he davens, like the modern Ivrit, Yoshev Seter Elyon. There's a video from Hanukkah from this year, and he puts on the kolpik, and on Shabbos there's a Rishner Shtreimel and everything. But during the week he dresses more modern, as his father did. His father was also, it's interesting, his father's yahrzeit is Heir, which is interesting. That's the Israeli Independence Day, the previous Pakshana Rebbe. And his Hasidim would be, more modern Orthodox, religious Zionist. But that's also a minority. The majority of the people who dress like Haredim are, like I said, Agudas Yisrael. And so their ideology is what's called non-Zionist. They're not anti-Zionist, they're not pro-Zionist. They more or less want to protect their community's needs and wants, and that's pretty much it. But they're not opposed to the state of Israel, and they're not supporting of the ideology of the state of Israel. They don't see any eschatological implications in the state of Israel. So, for example, the religious Zionists, they'll have an Israeli flag as almost like a religious symbol, meaning they'll have it in the synagogue. The Agudas Yisrael will put it on top of the yeshivas and things in order to show their respect for the country where they're in, just like they would put an American flag in America, but they see it as a secular, patriotic symbol, as opposed to seeing it
in
as
a quarter mile, continue straight onto New Jersey 15 South.
Sorry about that. As opposed to seeing it as a religious symbol. So to the modern Orthodox, religious Zionists will
continue straight onto New Jersey 15 South.
Will celebrate Hey Iyar, or Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Israeli Independence Day, as a quasi-religious holiday, including saying Hallel, and many would say Hallel with a bracha, which is a big question, whether or not you're allowed to say Hallel with a bracha. And even without a bracha, there's a question about saying Hallel for no good reason, But even without a bracha, the Sephardim don't say a bracha on Rosh Chodesh or on the last days of Pesach, in the Chutz La'aretz from the third day on, and in Eretz Yisrael from the second day on.
Continue on New Jersey 15 South for 3 miles.
So, meaning, when you see that question in Halacha about saying Hallel with a bracha, it's a very questionable thing. But also just to say Hallel in general, even Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was a leader in the religious Zionist community, he said that his Zionism was a patriotic form of Zionism, and not meaning he was religious and he was a Zionist, but he wasn't the religious Zionist in the sense of he felt that it was even blasphemous to recite Hallel on Hayir. He's put on record as saying that, although in yeshiva he didn't want to be parishim and tzibur, so he would stand there and be quiet while the whole yeshiva, the minyan that he was davening with, was saying Hallel. He would stand there even with the siddur open to Hallel, but be quiet and not say Hallel, or maybe even have a Gemara or something. They say that by Reb David Lipschitz in YU, sometimes Hey Iyar falls on Bahab, so you would say the Slichas for Bahab.
2, 9.
So
3,
it's interesting
4,
stuff.
2,
I guess I will
2,
pause this.
9.
So, but again, this is the modern Orthodox. That's not the religious Zionist. I mean, not the haredim, but the haredim who are neutral are the Agudas Yisrael and some of the others, Dagel and United Torah Judaism and these other, which are really under the Aguda banner ideologically, in America they also have Agudas Yisrael of America, and they have their things, but that's not as political as in Israel, where it's actually a political party. So, like I said, those communities, they would not say Hallel on Hayir. They see Israel as religiously as not really that important. The state of Israel, the devotion is to the land. There certainly is devotion to the land and to the Frum community, and to try to help the Frum community, the Orthodox community, and their own communities. But they're not anti-Zionist in the way that the Satmar are, and so that's the more mainstream. The Lubavitch, which you could question as to whether or not they're really Haredim or modern Orthodox, are really somewhere in between or something different, totally different, ideology, separate from either one in a certain manner. The Lubavitchers, they don't have any members in the Knesset. They're not involved in the politics the way that the Gera Hasidim and the Vizhnitzer Hasidim and the Belzer Hasidim are. But they also have a lot of right-wing Zionist ideology. So they're somewhere in between anti-Zionist and right-wing Zionist. They're kind of where those two meet, as opposed to the Haredi Aguda ideology, which is kind of like what we said
in
about...
In a quarter mile, keep left to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
What Mel Brooks said, let them all go to hell except Cape 76. They're not really caring about changing. For example, they're not seeking to make Israel a religious state, as opposed to
Keep left to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
The religious Zionists have ultimately a goal of making Israel into a religious state. But they want to do it pragmatically, and they're patient, but they see it as, this is a way of getting to Mashiach. They see it as something eschatological with the religious Zionists. The non-Zionist haredim really just care about themselves, more or less. They are interested in Kiruv, they are involved. Or Sameach is where I learned, is ideologically aligned with Agudas Yisrael. The ideology of Rav Shach and the Gerach Hasidim, and that's really the Or Sameach approach, more or less. And yet I myself went a different way. I myself,
Continue on New Jersey 15 South for 2 miles.
Adopted more of the anti-Zionist approach and didn't necessarily go in the way of the yeshivas where I learned. So that's the answer. Meaning, if someone is in the Knesset, it's because they're not anti-Israel. They're not anti-Zionist. They might be, though, non-Zionist, similar to how there are Arabs in the Knesset. Are they Zionists? Some of them, there are Arab Zionists, there are Muslim Zionists, certainly there are Christian Zionists, but there are a small amount of Muslim Zionists as well, meaning that they accept, they don't have a problem with the Jews having their land and this and that, the way that the Zionists believe in that. Nonetheless, most of the Arabs in the Knesset are there for the same reason that the haredim in the Knesset are there. But you would not find the Satmar in the Knesset, who still is ideologically Satmar. That you're not going to find. You do have some people who, culturally, still identify with the Satmar Hasidim, where it's a Gevorne Gelechter. It became some kind of a joke with them, and they will have a barbecue on Hayir, as an act of either rebellion or to do so ironically. But that's an anomaly, and the religious Zionists love to make a big deal about that. Look, there's a Satmar Chassid who's making a barbecue for Hayir, or there's an Einikel from the Berach Moshe who's now in the IDF or whatever. But that's something different. Meaning that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the different views, and that's the world we live in. There are many different views, but it's not monolithic. The Haredi world is not in any way, shape, or form monolithic. Even in the individual communities, there are different views, and everybody has their own thing. So you can't pigeonhole people. People are people, and everyone's an individual. That's the best answer I can give. But the simple answer, just to end, is like I said before: the ones who are in the Knesset are the ones who have a political view of protecting. And again, it's not even like the Arabs who are in the Knesset, because the Arabs who are in the Knesset, might actively want to stop Israel from being a Jewish state, whereas the Agudistin, they would not actively lobby for Israel to stop being a Jewish state, the way that I would feel it would be better to have a one-state solution, non-sectarian.
In a quarter mile, continue straight to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
Binational country, perhaps with American-style federalism. That's my personal view. That's not the Satmar view. I don't represent anybody else with Joe Kolakowski.
Continue straight to stay on New Jersey 15 South.
I wouldn't even call it Koblenzer view. Like I know, I have friends who are Rebelach, and
Continue on New Jersey 15 South for 8 miles.
They'll use the Rebbe Vista, to refer to anything, including their own ideas and this and that. That's not the it's not even because I don't want to attach this to the Chavos Yorer. It doesn't have anything to do with the Chavos Yorer. This is Joe Kolakowski. I'm not even saying Yitzchak Kolakowski, and it's somewhat similar to what Caroline Glick said about the Israeli solution, to have a one-state solution. But it's a little bit different, because it's my view. It's not Caroline Glick's view. But nonetheless, the Agadistan, they don't have a horse in that race. It's not their issue. The main thing is they want to protect that the yeshiva boys should not be drafted. They want to keep the status quo agreements that were made at the beginning of the state. Not draft the yeshiva boys, not draft the girls, the Orthodox girls at all, not and all of these other things that are part of their agenda. Make sure that they get the funding and things like that. And that's their agenda. It's a lot of it is money and issues with the draft. Excuse me. But they're not bent on using the government for sure. They would not use the government to make everybody frum the way that the Kahanists might want to do that, and even the more moderate religious Zionists might, see that as an eventual goal, but they're not. But they're more liberal and this and that, and like, how do they balance that with a few exceptions? I'm trying to remember the name of the guy, Rabbi Amselem, I think his name is. He's a religious Zionist, but he's a pragmatist, and he's a liberal. And how do you have those balances? So I've rambled on long enough. Thank you so much for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later. How do I turn this thing off?